Hi, on today's webinar on August 15th, we talked about COVID sick leave because we have a number of clients who still ask us about it. It's not something we talk about quite as much, but we still have employees asking for time off under this COVID sick leave law. And I'm here to just remind you that it still is in effect. And just as a reminder, this is the law that requires up to 14 paid days for a large employer, 5 days for a smaller employer, for mandatory or precautionary orders of quarantine or isolation. And so the first thing I would mention is that you should not be seeing any precautionary orders of quarantine because that's not the public health guidance anymore. Employees are not being asked to quarantine just because of exposure, and so you shouldn't be getting those requests. If you do get such a request, I would push back on it. Now, in terms of employees who actually have COVID, they still are supposed to be isolating, and so that's the situation where you would need to possibly provide the time off. Now, governments aren't giving out quarantine or isolation orders, pieces of paper anymore that we saw back in 2020, but there is an affirmation of isolation that can be filled out, and you are supposed to treat that form as if it were issued by a government entity. So if you see this form, the affirmation of isolation, treat that as if it came from the government, and then that should be your trigger to start the process of approving a leave under the New York State law. Now, a couple of things to remember about this law that's been in effect for a few years. Number one, it's calendar days. And so if someone works Monday through Friday, when you're counting the number of days that you give them, you actually count the weekends. So if someone needs to isolate for 5 days and they come to you on a Thursday, that would be Thursday, Friday, Saturday or Sunday, they don't work, and then day 5 is Monday. So you're not actually providing 5 paid days, you're providing whatever number of days that they happen to be scheduled over their isolation period. And notice I just said 5 days. Even though the law still says 14 days, no one is asked to quarantine for 14 days anymore. Again, the public health guidance has evolved. And so the number of days you have to provide corresponds to how long they're supposed to isolate, not the 14 days. That's not an automatic 14 days. Now, I do want to mention a couple other things. One is a reminder that the Department of Labor has put out guidance that an employee is only entitled to this type of leave 3 times, period, 3 times. And there's guidance on the DOL's website that says that you can actually require a doctor's note. I know a lot of people have said, well, what about home test? And if you want to be strict and require a doctor's note, you can require a doctor's note, according to the DOL guidance that's on the website. Now, I wanted to let you know that there is potentially some light at the end of the tunnel on this law. One of our state senators has introduced a bill. It's numbered 7250. It's very early in the process. It's only in committee at this point, so it's a long way until it becomes a law. But under Senate Bill 7250, it would first clarify that the maximum number of days is 5 for any size employer. It would not be 14 anymore, because as we just discussed, that's really not in line with public health guidance anymore. And then secondly, there's a sunset provision. Finally, what it says is that on or before April 1st, 2024, the Commission of Labor is supposed to submit a report to the governor and some other state officials reporting on the usage of this type of leave. And then within 60 days, if the legislature does nothing, then the entire law goes away, it sunsets. In order to keep the law active, the legislature would have to adopt a resolution declaring the continued need for the leave. So we here at Bond will be closely watching Senate Bill 7250 to see if it makes its way through the legislative process and becomes law. If it does, we have the potential for this COVID leave law to be sunsetting in 2024. So that's the update we provided on the webinar. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for listening.